Excited to talk to my next guest on the Sports Card Shop guest line. He is the author of a new book about one of my favorite topics and a set that my Grail card happens to be a part of. That is, I think I will have to say it's the 1949 Leaf set. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But Brian Kappel, author of R.E. Leaf. Here's the book. I'll hold it up. I'll hold it up again, put it right in front of my face where it looks a lot better. But it's a great book. Didn't take me long to read. When you're interested in a topic, you kind of just devour it and go right through it. And I always try to approach when I read Brian like I'm going to read chapters 1 to 4 today, and this was a book like I'm like I had that plan, and then I just kept going. I guess I'll start off with the first. Was this your first? Is this your first book you've written?
It is. It is. It was kind of like one of those epiphanies when you start going through and you start, hey, I wonder about this, I wonder about that, and you start getting all this good information that you get to a point you're just like, I should probably write all this down, and so
Yeah.
that's what we kind of started doing was going through and kind of laying out all these ideas and all these concepts and theories that I had, and then I started bouncing them off my dad, and he's like, well, what about this? And he started researching some other things, and that kind of led to, well, let's just try writing a book and see what kind of comes out, see how much stuff we've got. And it was funny when we went down the rabbit hole how much stuff we actually kind of stumbled across, and how many of the little connections on the yarn wall we started making when it was just like, oh, well, what about this to this and this to. So I think the reason that it reads fast is it's basically an excited kid kind of brain dumping all at once, and that's kind of what and so I thank the folks that kind of helped me edit it, because I was all over the place on the first one. It was just scattergun of thoughts all over the place, and you had people like, hey, take this and put it here. So it was a fun experience for sure.
Yeah, and a family affair as well. Like you mentioned, your dad being a scientist, wants you to get the facts right and correct. Your sister was involved. Your uncle was a huge contributor. Rest in peace. I know you lost him, but really kind of filled in a lot of blanks on the printing processes of the day because he was kind of involved, not necessarily with Leaf, but knew a lot about that time period and how things were done. And so you had there's a lot of tentacles family one, but again you did, to me, I mean, you could correct me if I'm wrong. There's been books that have talked about this set, but to me this is the first book that really focuses on the set and the company exclusively. Would I be correct in saying such?
Yeah, I think that's another thing that kind of pushed me to write it was, as I started going through and digging into the set personally, because this all came from me wanting to basically put the set together for me to pass down to my kids. Because at the time when I was putting it together, it was 48 and 49, which was the year my parents were born, the year my wife's parents were born. So it was like this perfect kind of, amalgamation of a bunch of things. And I'm like, that'd be a fun set to put together. And so as I started digging into it, you kind of go through which is commonplace in the hobby, is the kind of legend and lore that lives out there around things, be it the barge full of 52 tops that were dumped in the bay to all the other little things that we all know about. And it was funny hearing all these things that one person says this or one person says that. Net 54 was a great resource for me, and back in the day it was Ted Zenadakis was on there all the time, so I was constantly bouncing things off of him, and he was super blunt but knew it because he was a kid who bought the cards when they came out. So that kind of started well, I have an opinion about this and I have an opinion about that. And then drawing from my art background of being a designer and painter and illustrator and everything like this, knowing the printing process, when I landed the Jackie, it came in and it didn't have any hat details on it. And I was like, well, is this an error, or is this, one off, or what's going on here? And so that kind of started me digging a little bit deeper. And then you get into the industry standards of what the grading companies recognize, and you try and get behind, okay, well, okay, so there's a red hat Kent Peterson, there's a black hat Kent Peterson, and then you've got the Gene Hermansky era, and then you've got the Cliff Aberson era. And you start looking at those, and it's like, well, they're not alone. And so when I
Yeah.
got a blue hat Jackie in, I was like, well, wait a minute. So there's more than this. And then you start seeing a blue hat DiMaggio, a red hat, Stan Musial. And it's like, wait. There's a whole other thing going on here outside of the short print release of 49 cards.
Yeah, and the book does a great job at, like, you use those illustrations. Like, you don't just talk about those differences and errors and variations, however you want to term them. There's pictures to prove it. Like, if anyone wants to say you're crazy or I don't know what you're talking about, the proof is in the pudding. And that's the thing. They're not really recognized, right? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? People, it's weird because people will talk about it, and then it's like they're on to the next thing, and we don't really have any sort of final thing or conclusion. Like you said, any of these graded, they're not going to mention. They're going to be graded as just a regular card. The flips are all going to be the same,
Yep.
regardless of what variation of that is. I mean, do you think that will change? Do you think this book might be the catalyst to create some of that change?
I would love it to be. I would love it to be at least considered. And I've gone, and you read it in the book. I've gone back and forth with PSA about it, and it's funny when you get further into it, and the conversations that I had with Dr. James Beckett is that the grading companies kind of go through and acknowledge the ink variations, which I think is what people get hung up on. Is that you can have a blue that's periwinkle blue here and royal blue over here, but it came from just a different print run. It's like you can get those kind of ink things going on. But the ironic thing is that when you look at the 48 and 49 Leaf football issues, PSA actually recognizes the variations or the dropouts of inks. So it's kind of a double standard to a certain degree. I think that that's the thing that most people have a tough time kind of getting past is those color variations. And I think that there's a lot of things that get hung up on just the overall appearance of the card, but the plate variations I talk about, those are the physical changes to the printing plates that delineates between just a change in ink color, because there was no standardized inks until the mid 1950s. So they were basically just getting whatever ink they could get from their distributor and putting that on card. The thought that we kind of have is that this is like a swing shift print run, is that those presses were running the candy boxes that Leaf was producing and putting their candy in during the day, and the guys were running the cards at night type thing, just to run them through and stuff like that. And that's why you get all the problems with registration and miscuts and all of those things, because they were basically just had a stack of card stock, the same card stock that they used on the boxes. They just ran the cards through on that. So I think that the color variations aside, which is really more of just like that's something that's in the production, the actual plate variations yield a totally different look of the card. And that's kind of what I dig into in the book is there is a subset of the original 49 cards that were printed that's actually more rare, that falls in line with that Kent Peterson red hat variation that's just not recognized at all.
Yeah, you refer to them as color lines. To me, it's like where they prevent the bat from touching the border where it was before. Now there's color. What I one of the questions I had for you, Brian, is why do you think they did that? They just the aesthetic of it,
So it's interesting because I think aesthetics drove, I think sales, candidly, I think drove a lot of what they did. And I kind of get into it in the book, and it's something that I'm hunting down right now because on top of writing the book, I'm an active and somewhat rabid collector myself. And as I dug into the set, I finished up the baseball set, but then it's like, oh, I like the boxing card. Boxing cards are great. Well, boxing cards have all kinds of issues too. But to take it one step back, the first set that they produced was the Pirates cards, the actual, Blackbeard type, Captain Hook type pirate cards.
Not the Pittsburgh variant.
Not the Pittsburgh ones, yeah. And what's interesting about that is as I went through and started acquiring those, I got a couple auction lots that the backs had no numbers. And, I go into it in the book that essentially I think what happened was they produced that set without numbers, it went out into market, and they realized that they could capture a bigger audience by putting numbers on them because kids would try and chase the set, which was the start of them skip numbering the sets that they did in every set except for the 1948 football set. That's the only one that's true to 1 through 98. Everything else is skip numbered, trying to just get kids to buy cards. So, I think that there's things that happen kind of along the way that you're just kind of like, I think sales drove a lot of it. I think that when they put the first cards out for the baseball set, I think that there was something that happened that they're like, well, it just looks sloppy if Babe Ruth's jersey bleeds into the border. Can we just put 2 lines down the side of it to just close it off? And I think that's what it, because everything else was subtractive, right? With the Kent Peterson hat that I keep going back to, the black hat is kind of the main run, and then they basically masked off the hat, which let the red that was underneath it shine through, so it makes the hats brighter. Now, I don't know if that was in a reaction to the Bauman cards coming out that were just brighter cards. Then they're like, well, look at all their hats. All their hats are colorful. All ours are black. And they just kind of said, take the black off. Everything's going to go to a brighter hat, or what that was. And then I think probably when they were on press, they're just like, well, let's add these color bars to kind of close things off to make the card look more finished.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we can kind of just speculate there because the people who've made those decisions are unfortunately no longer with us.
Yeah.
But it is like you said, that kind of stuff is different than just, hey, we don't have this exact blue now, run with this one. Yeah. Those were calculated, or those were decisions. That wasn't just, hey, this is the blue we have today. So that's
exactly. Yeah. It wasn't a product of, oh, this is what you're taking off the shelf and it's going to yield something that looks different. It was and there was an article I came across at one point that had one of the warehouses in Chicago went up in a fire, and I could never tie that to why things changed, but that could be it too. Is that that warehouse fire could have led to the original printing plates being messed up, whatever it was, that it led them to go through and say, okay, we got to reproduce everything. We've got all the images. Let's fix these things that we kind of have out there. And now we're going to produce our second. And then that got squashed by the suit from Bauman. So.
Yeah, it's real interesting. And one thing, like you said, then the skip numbering came into play, which is a marketing ploy, as you mentioned, to get, kids or anyone to buy more candy to get the cards to complete the set. And if a manufacturer did that today, the collecting public would heck, sometimes one card won't get produced by an accident, not even intentionally, and people want to like crucify Topps or Panini or whoever, or if they ever did a like I know Heritage has done stuff, but they tell you ahead of time type of thing. But if a company ever did that kind of on the down low, that would not be well received in today's hobby, comparatively speaking to 1949 and 1950, when no one really knew. That was the premise, right? No one's going to know, and we just got to keep. I got to get my set done. I got to get more. I got to get more cards.
Well, and what's funny too is that Leaf was a candy guy. His sole purpose was pushing candy, and he liked the cards because they provided a backer so his gum wouldn't break. So it's like whatever he had to do to get kids buying more candy, he was all in. He didn't care about all the rest of the stuff. He just wanted to push candy.
Yeah, but and I think the book eloquently points that out, that he was a marketer, right? He was, like you just said, he's like, we got to sell as much candy as we can. There, for those that I'm giving away a little bit of the book. Like the family name was Lifshitz. They changed it to Leaf. It probably sounds a little nicer, if you will. It'd be interesting if we were talking about the 1948 or 1949 Lifshitz sets. That might be a little more fun. But they did change the family name. Talk about too, when we talk about printing processes today, it's all a lot of computers and different things. This is a whole different era in the 40s. And like you said, we didn't even have the standardized kind of color system. But your uncle was instrumental in kind of filling in a lot of those blanks and making you like see it from his lens, who was around during those days. Kind of talk about his contributions to kind of filling in the blanks, or like you say, connecting that yarn and answering some questions that only certain people can.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the great part about it, was being able to kind of connect with different family members and everything. And so when my dad and I were just discussing printing processes in general, and again, mine was more from like that kind of fine art lithography, just understanding plates and placements and registration and all that kind of fun stuff, from what I did professionally on the screen printing level. And so when we were having these conversations, he brought it up that he was my great uncle, so he was my dad's uncle, and he lived down on Long Island. But after the war, so my great grandfather owned a building, basically lower Manhattan, and in that was a print shop. And so my uncle Lester worked in the print shop. And so he was around the tech of the day, and they did a lot of stationery and things like that, but he was familiar with all the process. And so when my dad had an opportunity to go down and talk to him, at 98, he was still sharp as a tack. And so he brought some of the cards down, and it was this fascinating kind of listening through the phone to the conversation that he was having, of just, looking at it and being almost like laughing to a certain degree, where it was just kind of like, you know, and I kept on kind of prodding him, and I say it in the book. I said, well, are you saying these guys aren't the best, printmakers out there? And he's like, Brian, because every time he would say something, he'd throw your name in for Brian. It would be like bringing the space shuttle to your corner mechanic, and so you had these great insights into basically just saying, look, this is like functional printing at its lowest level.
Yeah.
And he was the one who basically said, look, this is the process, this is how they did it. And I said, well, what about the inks? And he's like, he was buying whatever his distributor had. And he was just like, yeah, give me 4 of those. We're going to print cards today. And so he kind of opened the insights to how a print shop like that would work. And it was basically this idea of, like you said, they weren't trying to print Van Goghs. He's like, this is just straight function. They had the equipment on site, and they figured out they could run a sheet through, and they could get basically 4 up of 49 sets. So essentially, 200 cards or so. And that's what they did. It was 198 cards, 196 cards they could get on one sheet. And so they would run through and run that. Basically, it was just a value add for the candy that they were doing. And he acknowledged the fact. He's like, well, that's why you see the things like the ghosting of the backs of some of the cards on the fronts, of cards. That's why it's called a wet sheet transfer. And what that is that they stacked up before they were actually dry. And so that's why you get and he just called it sloppy. It was just, they did just sloppy, just guys doing their job. That's all it was. And so it's like, I think there's a stark difference between even like a T206, a Gaudi, those processes were much more in depth, that this was really more essentially almost like an art print, because it was a 4-color process. There was nothing else going on here. And they did have halftones, which are the little dots that create, your greens and oranges and everything like that. But it wasn't anything, to the level of a T206. It wasn't a handcrafted, slate slab that they were printing off of that yielded, rich colors and tones and everything like that. It's like you look at a leaf card and you look at it like a Cracker Jack card, and you're just like, well, these are just, night and day different. But it's just it was really, again, kind of that more functional thing. And you can understand it, that he's got a piece of equipment on site, and he's going to try and do everything he possibly can to monetize any time that he can keep that machine on. And that's what they did.
Yeah, and again, like you pointed out too, right? Was a candy company first and a card company second. It's different than today when they're separate divisions, even like Tops had with Bazooka and that sort of thing later on. So they were more worried about the candy. The cards were sort of, I don't want to say gimmick, but in a way a gimmick to sell more candy. And so, how much attention to detail, they're just trying to get these, like you said, run shifts. The machines don't stop. Let's get these things boxed up. You did a great job of detective work and even determining that, like you said, the cards were made from the stock that the boxes were made, so that it was just in house. Hey, we have this cardboard already that's making the boxes. Let's use that. Just cost effective, and that sort of thing. And so that's one great thing. You definitely did your homework, whether it be, we going on the message boards or even local community boards. Like, hey, what, figuring out what facilities existed in neighborhoods at that time, and kind of, doing that NCIS stuff,
Yeah.
right? And putting together. And that's what I think made the book so great is, like, I want, like, he you did a great job of, like, illustrating, hey, this is coming. We're going to talk about this, and then I'm like, well, I don't want to wait. I want to know right now. And so that's where I kept reading. But you did, hats off to you, Brian, because you really deep dived and did. Someone could have probably did half the work, and the book still would have been good,
Well,
right?
thank you. No,
But you said, hey, if I'm doing this, maybe with your dad's influence of that scientific factor, but you're like, I want to do this justice. I want to do, and from your own self, right? I want to know too.
yeah.
This was
Well,
the,
oh
you,
yeah,
you
there
know,
was a vested interest in this for sure, where it
yeah,
was like, if I'm going to do this, I want to make sure that the information's right. I want to make sure that it's good, and I want to make sure that it's, as bulletproof as it possibly could be, because I think that at the end of the day, there, like I said, there is so much legend and lore that kind of lives around the hobby, that it's like, if I'm going to try and prove something, I want to make sure that I exhaust every single thing that I can do, chase down every single piece. Now, there's still some things that kind of live out there that are theory, right? That I don't know, that I still have a theory on. But when I got the actual documentation on the court case from Bauman DeLeaf, that was the game changer, because that went through and literally took a bunch of the things that I had in theory and made them fact, because it was in the actual print that it says, hey, we as Leaf Company went out, we bought machines, we're producing everything in house. It's like, okay, well, there it is, because I had found the picture of the production facility at the Chicago History Museum. And so it's like, okay, well, this kind of works. But then when the president of the company actually says it, you're like, check. Okay, they did them in house. And there were so many of those that kind of came up that I think it made for a more solid story, and it kind of canceled out a bunch of the random thoughts that kind of passed through on the cards. That it's just like, well, are they 48 or are they 49? President of the company says, truck leaves Chicago for Boston, March 14th, 1949. Okay, there it is. So
yeah.
it's
That's called
in
that's
print.
called a smoking that's called a smoking gun
Yeah. Yep.
for people who know what that is. And that's even your theories, even the ones, Brian, that you didn't fully, you put it together well enough where, like, I'm convinced, like, I'm like, it makes sense, hearing it that way. Why would it be any other way? So while it may not be as black and white as a court document, even some of the other things you put together are very convincing in their own right as well. Again, kudos to you.
Thank you.
Speaking of that court document, I mean, that was huge. Talk about the court document. Like, who had it? Why did we not know about it for as long? Why did it not surface?
So
Kind of
it's
the
interesting.
backstory of that itself. Yep. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so that was another Net 54 find, and again, the thing, and I've said it to you before, is that the community is what makes this hobby so enjoyable. Is that people are willing to sit down and have conversations about stuff and throw theories at the wall and be like, no, that's crazy, or oh yeah, no, that could be. And there were so many of these conversations that I had that it was wonderful. I mean, it was a lot of fun. And so on Net 54, there was a post about someone who was basically working on. Um, a book about how litigations and lawsuits basically have changed the face of the hobby. And he had gone to the Cook County Archives and found the actual document in the Cook County Archives from Bauman, the response from Leaf, and then the settlement. and it had never been digitized, so it never appeared in any searches or anything like that. It was a physical, had to go there and actually dig through the archives. And so he was kind enough to basically take iPhone photos of each page and send them to me. And I sat there, and it was on my birthday actually in this year. And I went through, and I'm just like, this is the best birthday present ever, because I went through, and as I was finding things, I'm like, oh, they did it in house, it's right here, so I'm going
Yeah.
through and looking through all that stuff, and it was just absolutely fascinating. But then also knowing the scope of, and I guess this is the thing that I find really interesting too, is how much of what they were going through is still relevant today. Where you're talking about before, just the nefarious nature of skip numbering and everything like that. And it's like there are still some tones of that in modern cards as well. When you gold stamp a card, when you stamp it 1 of 1, you're building the rarity in. So it's different, but it's kind of the same.
That, the color variations, the
Yeah, I mean, so
parallels.
it's a little bit similar. But then also, when you dig further into that document, you also get into what Bauman was basically alleging is that Leaf didn't have the rights to use the players' likenesses. All right, so now you're getting into NIL and what's going on in college sports right now, is that this idea of who owns the exclusive right, or is there an exclusive right to public figures' likenesses? And so that kind of laid the groundwork for what would ultimately lead to Bauman being destroyed by Topps, because they went from basically squashing Leaf in 49 to going toe to toe with Topps, in I think 52. And by the time 54 rolls around, Bauman's essentially, on the ropes, broke, has no money, and Topps takes over the market and runs with it. So, and the thing that I shared a nefarious laugh with was in the documentation from Leaf, because one of the things that Bauman had alleged was nobody else is making cards right now in 1948. So you guys are just totally, trying to cannibalize our market. Leaf went through it, and again, this was another validation point, because we had found that Leaf had sub brands of Overland and Dietz Gum that were producing cards as far back as like the early 30s. And so they cited those in the actual response, and they're like, no, we've been producing cards since the 30s. And as they went through and showed all those and everything else, they're like, oh, and by the way, there's this other company that's producing these cards. They're called Hocus Focus. Their name is Topps. So it's like inadvertently Leaf threw Topps under the bus and put them on the radar of Bauman for what would happen a couple years down the road, and in turn kind of changed the whole marketplace as a whole.
Yeah, it's a great point too, right? History sort of repeats itself, like with the unlicensed production of players under contract to someone else. You bring up NIL. It's like that in a lot of walks of life, right?
Yep.
The hobby's not immune to it. I think. I mean, I think you'll agree with me. I think that the court document. I've always listen. I've full transparency. I've always been a 1948 Leaf guy. I always felt like they were produced in both years, and that's where you get both years mentioned. But I think the court document, assuming that president or whoever testified to that statement is telling the truth, I think we now know it's 1949 Leaf. And like you said just now, and even in the book, like that kind of changes how we need to even maybe look at 1948 Bowman. Not the most aesthetically pleasing set, but because of the year and when it was produced. Now when we know kind of where Leaf fits into that chronological order, we have to look at it a little differently. Do you think, since the books come out, and have is there anyone that will, like I said, I was a 48 Leaf guy, and I can't really argue this, assuming it's the truth, which we have to in a court of law, right? Is anyone still sort of like that? Have you had any like feedback, like, hey, it's still 48 Leaf to me, or that, or have you had? I guess my question is, are more people like me and like, great work, Brian? I'll now recognize it's 49 Leaf. I think you solved the mystery, or do you have some stubborn people, if you will, that like, I don't care what the court document says.
Yeah, so
You
I
know,
think it's a mishmash, right? It's a little bit of both because I think to a certain degree, well, how about this on the grading side? I don't think it'll ever happen. I think that either SGC or Beckett has started putting 49 on there if the copyright is 49. So that's kind of a win, but not really. I think the problem.
here, like, so here's an SGC. This is my Jackie. This is my Grail.
There you go.
And it's 48, 49 on here. So
Okay.
they're covering
their butts.
they're
Yeah,
covering
yeah.
their bases.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
so I think you're going to see that because, again, with the copyrights on there, and what's fascinating is when you dig into 49 cards, right, that were basically on a printing plate on the sheet that they would produce, it was an even split for short prints and the main printing of how many had 48 and how many had 49 copyrights. So, again, the as I dug in, there was all the stuff that was living on the boards ahead of time, basically saying, hey, look at the backs of the cards. There's things that are happening on here that are in November, that are in December, that they're acknowledging on the cards. And that's trades. That's when the MVP awards went out and everything like that. And you look at the runway that would be left for distributing cards that would go out. The problem comes is that those cards that would go out with a 1948, they never packaged short prints with the main print cards. So you wouldn't just send out 1948 cards. You would have to send out everything that was on that sheet, and there's an even split of 48 and 49. So it's just, the more you kind of dig into it, it makes sense, right? Where you're just like, okay, these obviously came out in 49. And I think the problem is work happened in 48. And I think that's why you see a lot of those cards in 48, have the copyright of 1948 on them. The things that I think are interesting is like, Hal Newhouser, which is a short print rookie card, super difficult to find, has a 1948 copyright. And it has two versions. And so that's where I kind of jump into the whole idea of the salesman samples. I think in 48, they probably produced a sheet of salesman samples. And I think a lot of them look exactly like the main run of the cards. And that's for football, boxing, all that stuff. But you get the outliers. There's there's the Hal Newhouser. There's the Marciano that is numbered to 50, but never, I think there's only 6 that are known to exist. And then there's Joe Louis.
For those that are scoring at home, if that's the case, that's less than Honus Wagner D.
Yeah. That's the thing is you start digging into populations on some of those things, and you're just like, and the thing that I missed, and I'm kicking myself to this day, but there's a picture of it in the book, is there was a Joe Louis with a blue background that hit, and that's not the main issue that came out. It went to a white background with a red border around it. And so I think that because there was work going on in 48, I think the industry, the hobby, most people will refer to them as 1948 cards because there is that copyright on there. I don't think it's a distribution date. Now, the pushback from the grading companies is you're going to get a lot of people that are going to be, pretty mad about the fact that their Jackie Robinson now isn't a 48 card, it's a 49 card, and it's not a true rookie card because it came out in 49, not 48. Fact of the matter is, Leaf still hit the marketplace before Bauman did. That's why Bauman sued him. So it's like, you can dig into it and be like, well, it kind of still is.
I still love my Jackie card.
That doesn't. It's a great card. And I think that's the thing is as people say, and one that I live by is the whole, buy the card, not the grade. I think that's the thing is buy the card, not the story behind it too. I mean, if it's right in the range, there weren't many cards outside of regional issues that hit from that 47 to 48 time frame for a Jackie. So it's like, you've got 2 great cards that you can pick from in 49, the Bauman and the Leaf. And I think they're both, they both look fantastic and they're both, great cards. So I think it's very, I think people are open to calling them 49 Leaf cards, but I think that you have to kind of walk through all the stuff behind it because it's so cemented in the industry the way it is right now that people are a little slow to kind of accept it type thing.
It'll be interesting to see, like, to me, if I'm one of the grading companies and I get word of this and I read the book or I see the court document, I think from now on, you almost have to label them as 49 Leaf. Now, like you said, whether they do that or not, And I don't think, I know the fear for grading card companies. Oh, now we got to reholder all the ones prior that maybe have the wrong flip, so to speak. I don't think you necessarily have to do that. I think just going forward, you just grade them as 1940. It doesn't change the card, like
No,
you said
no,
in the holder. It's not a different set. It's just now it's come to light that if someone wants it reholdered, it costs 12, $15. They
right,
they can they can foot that bill if it bothers them enough where they want to flip to illustrate actuality, right? But
right.
other than that, I think the grading card companies from this point forward, let's say, could just put them in there as 1949 Leafs, and anyone else that has like mine that says 48, 49. If it doesn't bother me, but if it did, and I wanted to pony up $15 and just get a
Yeah.
new holder, I
Well,
don't think there's anything wrong with that. You know,
no, I don't either, and I think that's what the argument that I kind of make in there and have made to PSA about it is, there was a change that happened on the fly for T206 cards. When PSA started grading T206 cards, that's all they put on the label was T206, and then there was this kind of outcry for, well, we want what's the back? Okay, so now we're going to put Piedmont, we're going to put Sweet Caporal, we're going to put Polar Bear on the back of it though. Well, what about the factories? So it's like all these, and in me, at least to me, it's like the evolution of grading is the finding of knowledge and being able to get more finite in exactly what it is. Because if their purpose is to be like the holder of all the information in order to accurately grade a card and depict it in a way that it's like, okay, this is a red portrait Ty Cobb, but it's a factory 25 Sweet Caporal, so it's actually worth more than, or you got a factory 42 Piedmont or something like that. And I think that what that shows me and is what I would be paying for the service for is they're the bank of knowledge. That it's like they know all these little things that take these two cards that are almost exactly the same, and you get down into the finite details and like, okay, but this one's actually more because it's rarer than this one is here. And so that's why it's been a little, I don't know, funny, shocking. I don't know. Like, I guess whatever it is that PSA has pushed back so hard on it that they just kind of devalue it whenever I reach out to them and just kind of say, oh, yeah, we know about the color variations. I'm like, not talking about those. Just something
yeah.
else. In fact, you guys are already doing it. Look at Kent Peterson.
I don't want to speak. I don't want to speak for him, Brian, or I'm not defending them. I just almost think they don't want to get in the middle. I don't want to say controversy, but into like a debate. And if I think if they took a stance, there's collectors out there that don't recognize it and that
Yep.
would argue against them. So I
Yeah.
almost think they're like want to be a wallflower. They just want to stay against the wall and let whatever happen in front of them. I think it's
Yeah,
more to
and
that.
Jim Beckett said the same thing. Basically, he's like, you're going to get a lot of people that are going to be pretty miffed that oh, I bought this card, but you're saying that there's one that's worth more. Well, then I would have bought that. Now it's been misrepresented and all this kind of stuff. Instead of it being like this rolling evolution of it, it's like, So I think if anything, it's probably going to be, and it has been, because I've done a couple different shows. Like I was down in Nashville in July and just talking with people about it. And it was fascinating watching people, come day one, read the book, come back day two with the reference section that's in the middle and go jumping into everybody's value bins and then running over to my table going, did I get a late printing? And I'm like, well, okay, yeah. I mean, this is what and all this kind of stuff. So I think that if nothing else, if someone who's interested in the set all of a sudden has a new look or a fresh look at it and says, wow, there's actually more to this. There's another layer of collecting that I can go after in this, then I've done my job. Because I mean, that's what I enjoy doing, is going through and picking things out. And what's funny is, about 2 years ago in Strongsville, Ohio, I went to the vintage show there, which is just a great show.
Yep.
And this was, mid all of the research and everything like this. So it was like my dad and I were well versed in all the little things that were going on with the cards. And so we were kind of looking out for stuff. And I picked up a Gerald Pretty card. And I kind of, pulled it out of the value bin, looked it over my dad. I'm like, missing the blue. Because on that card, he's got a band of green that goes in back of him. And he's like, oh, $12. Perfect. Pick it up. So randomly, as I'm sitting there, as I do, one night, I'm like, well, if there's one of them, that means there's four of them, because that's the way the cards were printed. because someone had sent me a picture of a DiMaggio that was missing the black plate from a show that he was at. I think it was Chantilly. And he's like, is this one of one? And I'm like, no, technically it's one of four because there's four printed on each sheet. So if the black had run out, which happened often, that means there's four DiMaggios that look exactly like that. And so I was like, well, it would be kind of fun to track down the other four or other three Gerald Pretty cards. So I went on eBay because that's what you do. And to my surprise, there was 6 of them on eBay. So I'm like, all right, so that means 2 sheets went through with no blue ink, and there's 6 of these that were produced. The funny thing about it is that the lowest price on one of those cards was $1,200. The highest price was $5,000. I had got mine for $12. And they called it the non-green band variation. So, but what it was is the fact that the blue ink had run out.
That was one of my next questions too, Brian. Are dealers pricing some of these variations and that know about them? Are they pricing them according? Are they or not necessarily?
I haven't seen anybody kind of lean in on it. And every time that I kind of talk to a dealer, they're like, yeah, that's nice. So I don't think anyone has come around to seeing that, hey, I've got 5 Jackies, and of the 5, I've got one that's got a true blue, no detail hat and 2 yellow bars that come down on the sides. And that one should be about 30% higher than anything else that kind of lives in that grade level. So I don't think that information is hit or been readily accepted yet at that kind of dealer level yet. And I think there's, for people who are interested in the set and like digging and hunting for stuff, I think there's a lot of things that are out there that are a lot of fun to go grab.
Yeah, a little treasure hunt now in there. It may eventually happen, though.
It may. It could very well. It's interesting, especially going on eBay and putting in, a player like Johnny Hopp, and just seeing how many of those kind of pop up and have a black hat, and then how many of them have blue hat. That's all it is. You can see the early printings, and you can see the late printings, and like you said, it's about a 30% difference.
Now you've made this set. Have you completed, or are you in the process? Like, are you trying to get like a master set with all the color variations?
Oh, no.
Is that?
There's a bunch of guys out there that do try and get every representation of all the colors and stuff like that. I'm not that. I'm very happy. I finished the set. I finished it in my way, right? I'm not I need a PSA 8 or I'm not happy, or a PSA 5. I'm like, if it's in the door, I'm good. So when I was going through and getting down towards the end of it, I kept on making the joke to people. I'm like, I just need a corner of a satchel page and I'll be happy. In the ultimate irony, the card that I ended up getting, which was on like the last page of a Heritage Sunday sale that just was hanging out there with no bids on it, had all the borders cut off. And so I was looking for a corner of a satchel and got a satchel with no corners. So, it was just, but it's in the house. So it's, and I got it for a very reasonable amount. And so it's, my set came together in a very cost-effective way, because I was more happy just to have the cards than to, get the most pristine one out there.
But that being said, like you said, if you're at a show and you see something and it's reasonable, you'll add it to.
Oh yeah, I've got I have the proverbial shoebox of the oddities and stuff like that. I love, after going through writing the book, knowing the process, learning the process, all that kind of stuff, and it kind of immersing in. I'm a full-on Leaf junkie now, where it's like, if I see something that's off registration in a really weird way, I buy it in a heartbeat. If I see something that's got a missing back, buy it. If I see something that has I've got was it Choo Choo Justice from the football set? I've got one that has no black ink on the front, so it's just a ghosted image on there. And I love it. I think it's fantastic, because again, knowing the backstory behind it makes it that much more fun to kind of dig in and find things. And so it's like the George Vico card is one that I talk about in the book. And so whenever I find those, because he does have a late print version where basically the blue of his background bleeds into his hat, I buy those all the time, and I give them away as presents to people, because I'm just like, it's just such I think it's a dynamic looking card anyway. But whenever I see them, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll buy them. So
yeah, it's even but outside, like you said, even outside the baseball set, there's so many backstories and storylines and whatnot. And the Leaf cards, I know they're not going to win design awards, but they, at the time, colored cards were not common.
Right.
Hence the 48 Bowman. So while they had some errors and they couldn't get maybe color consistency right, Brian, they still were attractive in the fact that, hey, look, we have color on our trading cards here now. I
Absolutely.
think that was some of the allure, especially with kids at the time, right? And
Yeah.
so we got a hats off to for that, regardless of some of the mistakes that followed or some of the unscrupulous stuff to skip numbering. It was, the Lee family was innovative in many ways, and so we got to kind of give credit where credit's due.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's
Yeah.
funny looking at their full assortment. Like you said before, you said it was kind of a tchotchke, and it very much was. I mean, looking at when I was at the Chicago History Museum, a lot of the effects that were in that estate were just, sales catalogs. And the stuff that they would put in with things was just, it was funny to me. But looking back at it in 1948, I don't know that many people were doing that. Doing the plastic pumpkins at Halloween and crazy stuff for Christmas and all this kind of stuff. But again, it's like it was another gimmick for, and I'm going to go through and this is how we're going to sell the candy.
Yeah, and they did. They sold quite a bit of candy, and so hats off. They knew what they were doing, in some respect. Talk about the process of writing the book. Like, how long did it take you start to finish?
It was probably about a 2-year process, and I'm self-employed. I've got my own business, and so this became my basically like the 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. thing. Is that there was days that I would come down and I would just write. If I had found something, I would try and blow it out and stuff like that. If I was trying to build context of what was going on in the country at the time, then I'd focus on that, and was able to go through. My sister, who's a college professor, she kind of helped me outline, okay, let's try and get some kind of flow in what we're doing here. And so once I had that outline, then I was basically just working against that. Once I got the preliminary writing done, I kind of passed it off to a friend who was an editor, and then started passing it around to my kids, my wife, everybody else who was willing to read it, type thing. And got some great feedback there. And then I started working on the kind of visual elements, because again, since I do design, it's like, if this was going to be the only book that I was going to do, I was going to go for broke, and I was going to design every single element of it down to the little cartoons on the chapters and stuff like that. And so it's like, all right, I'm just going to go through and I'm going to do this whole thing up. So there was a shift when it was out editing, that I was going through and trying to get the look of everything together and trying to get all the images together. And then when we kind of put everything together, that's when my dad and my sister kind of hit me with well, you got to reference all those pictures, and you got like, oh, you got to cite this, and you got to cite. I'm like, oh, good. So it was, it took about 2 years, and it was ready to go at the end of April this year. We launched it on May 6th, and it's been great. And so it's been selling online really well. And then I go out and I try and do shows whenever I can. If we're out traveling and stuff like that, I'll set up a table and usually sell between 10, 15 books every time that I go to someplace. But it's really more about the conversations that I kind of have in between, which has been great. And I think that to me has been kind of the gold, is because I'm not retiring off what I'm making off the book. That's for darn sure. But I've really enjoyed connecting with collectors and kind of just talking shop with a set that I'm passionate about, and kind of leaning in on other people's passions about the set as well.
Yeah, well, it's well. Let me ask you this before I talk a little bit about the little plug for the book. I mean, now you're an author now. You did your. Is there another book? Is there another book in the pipeline? Like,
Yes and no. So it's interesting because I think we're probably going to take a sidestep from, and I say we because again, my dad's kind of my partner in crime when it comes to just me getting up in the morning and bouncing crazy ideas off somebody. He's usually the first one I call.
yeah,
Uh, I've been enamored with the 1940 Superman issues, so we might take a jump into non-sport. though I'm having a little bit of a difficult time figuring out the licensing that would go into writing that book right now, just because it's such a behemoth, and trying to get any kind of licensing or permissions from Warner Brothers DC is proving to be a little bit on the difficult side. But again, I think the interest there is the fact that you know Gum Card Inc. becomes Bauman, so it's like you start, another thread gets tied to a story, so it's
Yeah,
just start tying
connecting the
telling
dots.
these interesting stories that kind of run across the board. So we might do that, or there are a couple other things that we think are kind of interesting. So there might be another book that kind of comes in line with collecting. We want to try and run this one out because we're actively kind of in the Superman weeds right now, and that one's just a fun one. Tragic story on the rights of Superman, but the
Yeah.
card representations through the years are just absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, well, Ari Leaf, excellent read. I'm holding it up again, and like you the design element. I mean, look at the back. It's the wrapper, and plenty of photos to illustrate a lot of the thoughts and facts that are in here. Even the cover has a feel to it too. Kudos on that. But listen, you don't even have to necessarily be a fan of Leaf or the whole dilemma 48, 49. It's an interesting hobby book for anyone that loves hobby history, which I do. But then for me, they get the whole Jackie tie-in, my Grail card, and just being in content creation, right? You always have the debates what year it is, and like I said, I was always a 48 guy, Brian. I think now I have to be honest. You know, while it may have like it starts in 48 as far as like on the blueprint, the production was 49. I think the book kind of solves that mystery. Sometimes we watch these shows, right, where they're going to claim to solve the mystery, and then you watch the show, and at the end, you're still in the same place. I think
Right.
this book is a little bit, not a little. I think it's different because now we have, in this case, court documentation, testimony to when the first truck, not only the date the first truck rode, but where it went to, which
Yep.
was Boston. So we have details that have never been known before, or at least discussed on that level. And so some of these ends are kind of tied off now. And so, and I don't think, for me, saying it's 49 doesn't change my perception of the cards. It's just a year, it's 1 year to be exact. So really less if you look at it on a calendar, probably.
Yeah.
But so but it's your dedication and research, and that we can have this, I'll say, finale, at least on some of these questions. I think we've got answers now, and I think that's important, right? I think as a country we care about history. I think as a hobby, some of us care about history,
Right.
some may not, but those that do, I think we have some answers now, and I think that's important, and it's due to your diligence and getting in there and getting in the mud and getting dirty and finding all these things, right? It just amazes me that it took, you know 70 something years to really get some answers, and we've had, some big name hobbyists that but you did it. So again, great job by you. It's an
Thank
excellent
you.
book. I always give the guests the final word, where people can find you, what you're doing, social media, where they can get the book. I'll take your time, give all that stuff out.
Yeah, the book is available on Amazon. If you search Relief, it's on Amazon, and you can also go through reliefbook.com. It's available there, and then on Instagram, I think it's re_leaf book, and so I'm there. And then if you don't find it there, you can always go through Space Monkey Designs, which is my design company as well.
Well, awesome stuff. I think we broke some news that there might be another book in the works at some point there. So, and knowing how this book turned out, I'm sure it'll be. Well, I was a comic book kid. I'm not a comic book guy, but I'm sure you'll do it justice, and it'll be a great book as well. Brian, thanks again for making some time. Thank you for not only coming on the show but doing all that due diligence and getting some answers to some hobby questions that at times we probably wondered if we'd ever get a definitive answer, and yet here we are.
Yeah, John, thanks for the opportunity to come on and talk about it. Like I said, this has been a passion project for 2 years, and it's great to see people reacting to it and being open to talk about it. And I look forward to kind of keep on moving forward. And I'll let you know any books that are going to drop before they do.
Well, maybe a relief part two, as maybe some more, maybe this stirs up some other stuff,
It could very well. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, you never know when the information is going to come, and we didn't even get a chance to talk about the premiums or the boxing or the salesman samples and stuff
yeah,
like that, but it's all in the book.
yeah. That I don't want to give everything away. I want
Right?
you to
Yeah,
tell some
exactly.
more.
Don't want to spoil it all.
So, well, again, thanks, Brian. Get the book. It's a great read. Believe me, I'm not a huge reader, and I tore through this pretty quickly. So there you go.
Awesome.